Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I'm very pleased to be here. My name's Paul Standish, and I work at the UCL Institute of Education. And tonight, I'm delighted to be, this afternoon perhaps, I'm delighted to be talking to Rebbeca Hitchens from Ending Violence to Women and Girls. And we look forward to hearing what you can tell us about the organisation and about your role in it. So Rebbeca, can I ask you first of all to give us an idea of the organisation's mission and perhaps how you came to be involved with it as well?
Yes, definitely. It's really nice to see you all. Thanks for having me here today. So I work for an organisation that's called the End Violence Against Women Coalition. I'm head of policy and campaigns there. Our organisation, it's got about 160 members, and it's quite wide-ranging. A lot of our members are organisations you might have heard of, like Rape Crisis, Women's Aid, Refuge, but we've also got a lot of members who are specialist organisations, by and for organisations, and then also academics. And then we've got also organisations like TUC, NEU, a lot of unions, Amnesty, things like that. So it's quite broad-ranging. But we work more closely with those organisations who are doing that dedicated, often frontline work at ending violence against women and girls.
How long has it existed for?
We've been around for about 20 years. We were created because 20 years ago, the government in the time decided that they were going to create a violence against women and girls strategy, which they hadn't had before. And so as a result, I think we were an offshoot of Amnesty, actually, originally, and then sort of started there and then have become quite a much bigger organisation now. Yes.
Okay, and how did you become involved with it then?
I've been at EVOR for about 7 years. Before EVOR, I worked at Rape Crisis, and before that, I sort of supported women who were going through the criminal justice system as victims and survivors of rape. I know that you heard a wee bit about the law in general. I'm not sure how much you know about experiences of victims and survivors who go through the criminal justice system once they've reported to the police. It can be incredibly stressful. It can take a very long time. So there's a role called independent sexual violence advocates who sort of support survivors who are going through that. But I mainly work for EVOR because of how angry I am. And it is a very helpful outlet for that. That's how I got into feminism and women's rights. I'm one of 4 daughters, so I've got 3 younger sisters, and there was a lot of sexual violence that they experienced, and that made me even angrier than I think I was already born to be, and that's what got me into the work. Okay,
now you're working in the interface really between the situation of victims and their experience and policy, and clearly trying to put pressure on policy. Yes. Can you perhaps tell us something about your experience in negotiating that relationship? I'm sure it must be very difficult. And feel free to vent your anger in the process if you'd like to.
I can't stop it from happening. Yes, that is a really important part of my role, is trying to speak to policymakers and officials in government and parliamentarians to get them on side so that they are willing to push for and advocate for changes, often in legislation as well as in policy. They will often be quite removed from the real life experiences of women and girls, particularly Black and minoritized women and girls, particularly disabled women and girls, those living in poverty, etc. So trying to make the case is a big part of my job in a way that will ultimately, they see will ultimately be of benefit to them generally as individuals, because as we know, governments and parliamentarians are often very self-serving.
I realise some of this may be sensitive, but are you able to give us examples of success and examples of frustration and failure in trying to do that?
Well, the big failure is around funding for specialist support services. That's something that I have been working on for many years, trying to get government to better fund specialist support so that organisations aren't on their knees all the time, are able to grow and be there for survivors when they are turned to. I ran a campaign called No Survivor Turned Away, and it was basically around women who were calling up helplines, calling up rape crisis services, trying to get counselling and therapy, and they were just told, like, sorry, our waiting list is closed. Like, we've got a waiting list of a year, 2 years. We can't help you. Try somewhere else. Come back to us. And that is a travesty and shouldn't be the case. And we did some public polling, actually, and found that most people in the public do expect there to be specialist support services available if you're in crisis and if you need it, but that they're quite similar to hospices in the fact that hospices are really poorly funded as well, and you would expect them to be there, but they're actually not, and quite difficult to find. So yeah, that's one of the biggest challenges, and it's particularly difficult for by and for organisations, specialist organisations, to like access that funding. Successes. Recently, we have, so I do a lot of work around online harm, so online violence against women and girls, which has been grown massively over the last few years. There's been lots of emerging forms of harm, so you may have heard of deepfakes. That is a form of harm that disproportionately affects women and girls. I think it's like 99% of deepfakes feature women and girls, and I think it's 96 of them are pornographic. So I worked with a survivor of someone who'd been deepfaked. Her story was very powerful. She was being sent by her best friend. He was like, I found these images of you, like, you know, they're pornographic, and she saw them, and she saw the videos, very distressing, and was trying to find out who had created them, how viral they had gone. That's one of the issues with online harms, is the speed of which they spread, and the fact that when an image is then hosted online, you don't know where else it's been posted, you don't know how, even where removal does take place, you don't know if it can be re-uploaded. It's just really horrendous. Anyway, Jodie, which is a pseudonym, she ultimately did find out that it was her best friend who'd actually been creating those images, and at the time there wasn't proper legislation in place, so charges were actually brought under the Communications Act. He was convicted, which again is like very unheard of in my line of work to get convictions. And anyway, we started this campaign where to make the creation of deepfakes and the solicitation of the creation of deepfakes illegal, because often people don't have like that coding or that knowledge or skills. Okay, well, actually that's outdated now as well, because with Gen AI and Grok, everyone actually can really easily create deepfakes, as you may have seen earlier this year. Anyway, it was an offence was created, so we put it through. We got a peer, a baroness, really on side, who put in an amendment to a bill, and it was ultimately successful. So the government cowed under the pressure that we and others were putting on them. It was a Conservative peer who eventually, led those changes.
And are there many politicians who you would see as champions of the cause or not?
I think it's very interesting because Labour made a commitment to halve violence against women and girls. That was a big part of their manifesto. And we've been in power now a year and a half, and there have been a raft of announcements made, actually, particularly in the last month, that relate to violence against women and girls. It's still not enough. I think Keir Starmer in particular hasn't been very engaged. We've got a Minister for Women and Equalities, Bridget Phillipson, who you're probably aware of because obviously Education Secretary of State. She does prioritise education, and it's very important, but maybe to the detriment of like the women and equalities part of her brief. There are definitely engaged MPs, but they have to really be driven by their own constituencies and issues in their own constituencies. And what we found recently, and sorry, this might be getting too like public affairs-y and political, but because there's been such a big cohort of new Labour MPs, they're not as willing to like put their head above the parapet and make a voice for themselves, because they want to sort of court and curry favour with Keir Starmer, with number 10, with the team. Peers are where it's at, even though I obviously don't think that they should hold the power that they do. the system that we have around how laws are made, and the fact that bills progress through the House of Lords where they get additional scrutiny means that peers can be really helpful partners in trying to get legislative changes and improvements.
What about opinion leaders in the press?
It's so important.
No, seriously, are there people you see as champions in the press? Surely there are journalists. Yeah,
definitely. We've got a government who don't have any money and are saying they're going to do all this stuff about violence against women and girls, aren't really doing anything. We have found the press to be our most helpful partner when we're trying to leverage influence. So again, recently, so with Grok, you'll have seen that there was a bit of a groundswell of like, oh God, X is creating all of these nudification and pushing and promoting nudifying through their Grok feature. It was really only because the press tapped into that and reported quite heavily on it that government introduced sort of, some measures. Similarly, with, again, I don't know if you've seen recently, there's been quite a lot of coverage around smart glasses, the predominantly Meta product that records basically all the time, and it's really easy to disable the feature, the like LED light, to show others that you're recording, and it's being used to sort of harass and record women, and then that content is being uploaded by content creators who have a particular niche around approaching women, like pickup artistry. Anyway, so the press have been really helpful in drawing attention to that, and also the videos of women in nightlife. Again, these are just things where I've done quite a lot of media work recently. So the BBC did a big reporting piece on women who are being filmed covertly while out and about in their nightlife. So a lot of focus on like Glasgow and Manchester. And again, it's men, content creators, who monetize this content and get money from it. It was thanks to the BBC investigative piece that really shone a light on this sort of practice and made people be more aware of it. And that's helpful for women who are being recorded. It's helpful for maybe bystanders who then feel like better able to identify and maybe step in, and for like policymakers and lawmakers to be, thinking about, okay, what measures do we need to put in place to restrict this? Yeah, so very grateful for the media.
Yeah, and so given that you're talking about problems arising from social media in this recently, I wondered what there is in the way of fighting back within social media. How coordinated are campaigns or influencers within social media?
Well, it's tricky, as you'll know, all of you, I'm sure, in this room. Social media is a very helpful tool, and that's very true in terms of campaigning work, getting like the public to better understand. We've definitely changed our campaigning and sort of information approach because of the success of social media, trying to make more short form content and really break down what can be quite tricky legal issues. But in terms of the tech companies themselves and accountability of tech companies, that is really, really challenging, and has been quite a big part of my work in recent years, is trying to push for that type of accountability via laws and via the regulator Ofcom.
But I was wondering not just about regulation, but about influencers who would be putting your case or your side of this. Does that exist, or is it just too difficult to get that going in any scale?
There are some amazing influencers who are out there, who are producing feminist content, who are naming some of the harms and creating communities. They sometimes tap into some of our work, actually, particularly around image-based sexual abuse, because they are much more likely to experience it themselves. So they're a really helpful sort of ally, and actually helpful for influencing government as well, because if you can demonstrate to parliamentarians that there's a particular number of levels of engagement, or because often lifestyle magazines, they're tracking quite a lot what influencers are doing or saying. So maybe as a result of influencers going quite heavy on something, Glamour magazine or Cosmopolitan might pick it up and decide to, or Grazia we've worked with recently, they might decide to make that one of their sort of like areas as well and run with it.
Yes. Okay. In the dramatic increase, at least in reported sexual crimes against women, violence against women, so social media has obviously played a big role in that. But and also, of course, there is more reporting than there was in the past. So this isn't to deny that there was sexual violence in the past. But how significant do you think social media has been in increasing violence in other forms?
Good question. I'd be interested in everyone else's views. Okay, would be helpful to get like a bit of a read from who's in the room in terms of like, are there people who are you? Maybe do you mind?
No, go ahead.
Are you academics? Academics, okay. Like educators? Oh, cool. Like people who work in like policy and law? Law, okay, cool. All right, interesting, thank you. The big question, has social media increased levels of violence against women and girls? Do you think it has? Like, would you, I think it's very hard to track. I would say that it has, because, well, twofold. One, there are new and emerging forms. So image-based sexual abuse is not something that we had to worry about as much, 10 years ago. But now, I'm working on things where it's laws around semen-defaced images, where men are creating tributes. It's called tributes, where they are ejaculating on pictures of women and girls and then taking a picture of that ejaculation and sharing it. And it's like there's quite a lot of forums where that's a popular thing to do, and it's a way to sort of degrade and humiliate the women in the photos often. So that's not something that was like a widespread practice. So there's definitely these new and emerging forms. Social media is also contributing to reinforcing, I would say, gender inequality, because it is often content creators who are saying maybe more extreme things, and who are tapping into sort of populist, like fascist, neo-fascist environment that we're in at the moment, because that's what spreads, that's what gets engagement, and engagement does mean money, both for the creator themselves and more importantly for the platform. And so it's helped to I would say reinforce really harmful attitudes and behaviours around gender inequality in a way that is really harmful to men and boys as well. Like I definitely don't come at this being like, oh, violence against women and girls, it disproportionately obviously harms women and girls, but it's also super harmful to men and boys because it's based in that gender inequality. It creates those stereotypes around what men should be like, what masculinity means, and often what masculinity means in that sort of like traditional and regressive sense is super harmful to boys around them being able to express themselves, engage with emotions, be who they want to be.
I realise we're in territory where nobody really knows what the answer to these questions is, but I wonder what you thought about banning phones for 16-year-olds and below, or whatever they've done in Australia. I think it's 16 and below. Yeah. What do you think about that?
So we at my organisation do not have an official position on that yet. I think, and I feel really torn in terms of my personal position as well. Because seeing what social media provides and feeds to young people, because I think too often we've understood the internet to be this neutral space, but it's not. And I think, we do all understand that, but the way in which algorithms and the lack of transparency around the profit models that platforms use means that, young people in particular are just targeted with this really horrendous content, and has really, really horrendous impacts. And then you've got AI on top of that, which again is really scary in terms of the inherent bias it has, the way in which it masks itself as human, pretends to be human, and the way in which young people are often like turning to it as a form of support or a source of information, it just lends itself to, I think, even more harm being out about in the world.
And the sheer amount of time that's spent on the phone as well. Yeah.
But we know that social media, particularly for like disabled young people or gender non-binary, non-conforming people, is a really important space to find support, to find community. So I think that's why, like, bans in general, I struggle with. But I still decided probably personally, because I've got like 2 young boys, I'd be like, yeah, fucking ban it. But professionally, we are developing our positioning, and but we will, because obviously government are consulting on this, so that will be that's one of my like next pieces of work.
So your organisation is, in a sense, an education organisation. It's part of public education, isn't it, raising awareness and so on. But I think you're also interested in the role that schools have to play in all this. Would you like to say a bit more about that, perhaps?
Yes, definitely. Definitely on the public communications and awareness. It's hard. Our reach is obviously quite limited. I mean, when you're called End Violence Against Women Coalition, it's not super catchy, and like young people in particular aren't going to want to be like, oh yeah, what are they saying? So we try and get that influence. So we work with like EastEnders quite a lot, for example. So whenever they have a storyline that's around sexual violence. So we did quite a lot of work on one of their, if anyone watches it, they had like a young man who was sort of engaging in incel behaviour and then ended up attacking his stepmom, and she ended up hospitalised. Obviously, it's very extreme because it's EastEnders, but it's still a really helpful route by which we can try and, educate the public. We do a lot of work around schools. Schools are, it's so hard for them, it's so hard for teachers. It's mainly where schools are doing cool work. It's often when there's like a single or like a couple of educators who deeply care about the issue, who bring it into the school community, or students as well. We've seen really amazing work where students have just fed up and they create their own sort of like advocacy teams within schools to ask for better, often when there's been like sexual harassment that they've experienced or their friends have experienced. We talk a lot about the whole schools approach, where we recognise, and we also do a lot of work around relationships and sex education and getting that to be as high quality as possible and properly resourced for the teachers that do it and properly recognised, to make up part of the Ofsted inspection as well, that safeguarding element of it. That has got a bit more traction because it's cheaper for the government and a little bit easier for them to make schools do it. One of our campaigns as well is to get relationships and sex education up to the age of 18. It's only up to the age of 16, but we know that 16 to 18-year-olds experience, again, disproportionate levels of domestic abuse. They are more likely to be sexually active at that age. We know that porn use is incredibly high with our young people at the moment, and that porn is having huge influences on sexual norms. So we've seen vast increases in strangulation in sex, and other sort of slapping, choking, gagging, and forms like that. And we know that that's a direct influence from the high consumption of porn by young men. So our case is that as a result of that, RSE should be up to the age of 18, so that the spaces for people to talk about it and spaces for educators to like be able to bring up porn and talk about like what porn is and what it's not. Whole school approach is less hard. It's much harder to get people on board. It requires a lot more resource. When I say whole school approach, it means that countering violence against women and girls is woven into all of the curriculum. It's not just an inset day once every few terms, that there is proper policies and processes around every level, governance level, teacher level, pastoral care, how playgrounds are managed, etc. But that's a lot of money and a lot of like disrupting the norm. So it's really hard to get schools on board with that.
You talked about the whole school approach and I suppose dealing with these things across the curriculum. But that's really been lacking to a great extent, it seems to me. In my experience of schooling, when I was at school some time ago, but also schooling I've seen more recently, a subject like history will talk about terrible atrocities that are done.
Yeah.
But you don't get much reference in schooling to the way that rape is used as a weapon.
Yeah.
And that ought to be there, didn't it?
Yeah.
You know,
that's a campaign you've just created there, actually. I hadn't even thought about that. Yeah, definitely. Rape as a weapon of war is not properly understood. And there's so much around, like, trenches, I mainly remember.
Yes, that's right, that's right. But something that just went through my mind is this, that some of us have written about the mental health agenda in schools, which tends to be understood in terms of the deliberate intervention with happiness classes or managing your stress and things like that. And once again, we wonder if that's a little bit misplaced, because really a better way of dealing with mental health is not to treat it as something that's just comes up in pathological forms on the side, but actually something to do with the fundamental ways in which we think about the world and respond to the world. And so once again, it's the sort of thing that humanities subjects ought to be taking in. It ought to be inherent in those humanities subjects, not an extra that's been pushed in, but something that's already there as part of what the ways people make meaning in their lives, the way meaning is made in the world, and the insanity that is there in so many practices. But that's about mental health. It's not specifically about this. In all the social media stuff, there's an appalling demystification of sex and sexual relationships, isn't there? You know, everything's on display, everything's out there. And that, I think, is probably a very significant factor in altering the way people behave towards one another and understand sexual relationships in the broader world. So I have slight caution about putting the emphasis on sex education as the means of changing these attitudes. And wonder if it should come more broadly through the humanities.
Definitely, I totally agree with that. I think I don't know as much about sort of the mental health world in schools, but the idea of, I suppose, focusing on I worry a lot about the responsibilization of young people. It's like, we need to create spaces where, obviously, spaces are important for young people to talk about things, but there's a huge amount of expectation on them to be able to have sort of media literacy in today's world, and like, if you see something, just don't click on it, or don't take nudes even if you're asked to share something, just don't do it. A lot of the proposals that come from government, it's like, young people just need to do this and this and this, when actually there's so much structural stuff that is just untouched. So you talk about happiness, you can't talk about happiness, I think, without talking about capitalism and like recognizing the ills that has caused to people, and deprivation and economy and inequality, and that's the same with gender inequality. The fact that sexual violence is hugely individual, because it is a generally one perpetrator who's disproportionately a man or boy against a victim who's, again, disproportionately a woman or girl, obviously recognising that there are multiple forms of sexual violence where boys and men are victims too. But it happens between two people or within groups, but actually it happens because of structural issues, because of gender inequality, because of the ways in which attitudes and behaviours are rooted within that inequality, and the ways that it is generally boys and men are raised to think about and to talk about and to treat women and girls. So I think that's like a massive thing for schools to try and tackle.
Yes. You saw the Stephen Graham series, TV series. The name's gone. What's it called? Adolescence, of course. Yes. Okay. Yeah. So.
Well, what I'm doing actually, Paul, is I'm often lying about having seen it. Because I've done many media interviews on it and spoken in Parliament about it, but haven't actually seen it.
Oh well.
Yeah.
I recommend you do.
People do say that. I mean, I know the storyline. I know the power of it, and I think I couldn't. I actually very much struggle to watch anything on telly that is real life or documentaries.
Oh right.
Because of just avoidance, I suppose.
Yes, I see.
Because of work life.
Yeah.
But it's had a massive cultural impact. One of the things that we said in response to it, because we were grateful for the attention that it got, but we were very aware that the sort of focus on the boy was very compelling, but that his victim was completely sort of absent from it, and the victim's family, and so there was, and naturally you would feel like empathy for his family and to a degree what he went through, but we found it quite challenging. I think the impact has been so significant that it's also maybe been a bit challenging for us because of the focus on boyhood, and it's come at a time where there is the sense of like boys are in crisis. There's been a really important report talking about sort of lost boys as well, and that rhetoric is important to hold, but without losing sight of the women and girls who are impacted by like.
I don't want to spoil the plot for you, but
no,
in the fourth episode, you just made me think that I've been troubled by the fact that so much emphasis is put on the father, Stephen Graham, who's a brilliant actor and plays that role very well. But the mother and the daughter, the boy's sister, are kind of there in the background.
Yeah.
And, what are they going through too? Yeah. And they're supporting the father to some extent.
Yeah. I suppose the flip side of that is that we know that one of the most important influences on young men is their fathers or father-type figures, because they see how those figures treat the women around them, and that's such a defining aspect of how they then learn to understand the world and to understand the dynamic that exists between men and women.
Okay, coming on to another topic, I know you've paid attention to the experience, the different experience of different ethnic and cultural groups in relation to violence against women. Would you like to say something about your work in that respect, including questions of intersectionality as well?
Yes. So we, in my organisation, we always try and have a really intersectional perspective when it comes to violence against women and girls, and that is naming the experiences of Black and minoritized women in particular, the disproportionate harm that they experience, and the extreme injustice they will often experience if they choose to report to the police or engage with social services or report it to social services, because of, when we're talking about sort of structural inequalities, because of structural and systemic racism that exists in today's society. So I'm very, in my team, it's something that we talk about a lot, and has come, I suppose our most recent work around this has been, around, I'll just pop that there. We've done a lot of work recently around weaponization of violence against women and girls. So that means the far right using violence against women and girls as a way to legitimize and try and gain support for their political ideas. So pushing a particular message around migrant men and the threat that they pose to like British and white women in particular, and how harmful that is, and but also how effective that is. We've seen how effective it is, and because we've seen it be adopted by, I don't know if any of you saw a couple of days ago, The Guardian did this like cool visual tool on the way of like anti-migrant sentiment being used in the Commons and the Lords, and it basically showed that the sort of anti-migrant sentiment is higher than it's ever been, which we would all know from reading just being in the world. But the way in which reform and sort of the more sort of racist, fascist political views are informing our current government is very, it's very concerning. So one of our campaigns is like Not in Our Name, like don't use violence against women and girls as a way to bolster sort of racism and fascism. That's what we're doing.
How do you think the current scandal around the ex-Prince Andrew and Virginia Giuffre is playing out in relation to the concerns of your organisation?
Oh, God. I think the Epstein files is so... well, I think it's interesting and obviously awful in a lot of ways. The fact that there is a network of powerful, white, wealthy men who are supporting one another and both perpetrating or being complicit in the perpetration of rape of children and young women is appalling. But also, I think for many victims and survivors, it's not that surprising, because on even that smaller scale, for victims, they already have a real understanding of that like power dynamic and the way in which powerful people create layers of secrecy to allow harm to continue and proliferate. I'm not trying to minimize the like vicarious trauma that's occurred through the release of these files, particularly for the survivors who have been really poorly like treated in the release themselves. The politicking behind the release, I think, is abhorrent. The lack of any sort of accountability as a result of them, absolutely abhorrent. But also, again, not surprising. Like, look at here in the UK, the arrests of Mandelson and Andrew were made on the basis of like Official Secrets Act business, nothing to do with their connection and their their complicity and perpetration themselves around towards.
But would you not accept that possibly is because it's easier to get them on that?
Yeah, what's it called? It's like the Al Pacino method, or no, not Al Pacino. Whoa! Immediate retraction. I'm not inferring anything about Al Pacino. I meant the Capone. Al Capone. Al Capone. Yes, I have definitely heard that, but also, and I get it. And those sort of like diversionary disruption tools are used even by the police with like the more, like, you know, more day-to-day type of rape and prolific offenders of domestic abuse. They use lower level crimes to just get them into court or to try and interrupt their offending patterns in sort of domestic when they are really dangerous domestic abuse offenders. I get it, fine, yes, use whatever is in your arsenal, but I also think it's very representative and very telling of how we as a society respond to the Epstein files and all the crimes within it.
Can you say something about the longer term aims you have for your society, for your organisation? I'm kind of thinking that the ideal aim would be to become redundant.
Exactly. Yes. It's really helpfully in the title around ending violence against women.
Yes.
Yes, that's what we say. Ultimately, we don't want to exist. It feels very far away, really, not having to exist at the moment. But yes, I think it would need a huge amount of prioritisation by government and leadership, a restructuring of almost all sort of services and ways of doing things. It would be massive public campaigns around violence against women and girls, but also restructuring so that gender equality was a real and living thing. And there's many ways in which that would need to happen. Yeah.
How much do you work with volunteers at present, or?
I don't work with volunteers.
You don't?
No, I would obviously, but we don't have any in our organisation. I've been a volunteer for Rape Crisis. I worked on the National Helpline. I think volunteering in this work is hard, and there's a high risk of vicarious trauma. I think it's amazing when people are able to do it. In my role, I've never felt comfortable engaging in that because of just from a well-being safeguarding perspective. But volunteers are such an important lifeline to charities and organisations.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, I know Rebecca's quite keen for this to be a bit more interactive, and we'd like to involve more of you. So can we please turn to you and see who'd like to make comments or ask questions? I mean, you're free to develop your own point if you want to in relation to what we've been listening to as well.